Sic semper tyrannis. The words echoed through Ford's theatre on that fateful April night in 1865 as an actor delivered his final, most tragic performance. But what darkness lurked in the mind of John Wilkes Booth, the man who murdered Abraham Lincoln and forever altered the course of American history? What psychological forces drove this charismatic performer to become the nation's most infamous assassin? And how did the son of one of America's most celebrated theatrical families transform himself from stage hero to real-life villain? The mind of an assassin is a labyrinth of contradictions, but Booth's psyche presents unique complexities that continue to fascinate psychiatrists and historians alike. Born into theatrical royalty in 1838, young John grew up in a world where the line between reality and performance was perpetually blurred. As we'll soon explore, this early immersion in drama would shape his perception of his own role in history with devastating consequences. What must it have been like inside Booth's mind during his formative years? Contemporary accounts describe a strikingly handsome youth, blessed with natural charm and intense emotional sensitivity. But beneath this appealing exterior lurked something more disturbing, a grandiose sense of personal destiny and an increasing inability to distinguish between theatrical fantasy and political reality. Consider the psychological impact of being the ninth of 10 children in a family dominated by the larger-than-life presence of Junius Brutus Booth, John's famous actor father. The elder Booth was known for his explosive temperament and struggles with alcoholism, traits that would echo through his son's life. But more significantly, he instilled in young John a sense that the theatrical stage was where men of destiny made their mark on history. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Booth's psychological profile was his ability to compartmentalize. By day, he charmed audiences and critics alike with his passionate performances, particularly in Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. By night, he plotted treason and murder with cold calculation. The turning point in Booth's psychological deterioration came with the Civil War. His fierce Confederate sympathies, combined with his actor's flair for dramatic gesture, created a dangerous cocktail of ideological fervor and theatrical ambition. But what transformed these controversial political views into murderous intent? As we'll explore later, the answer lies in a complex web of personal grievances, thwarted ambitions, and an increasingly messianic self-image. Behavioral experts point to Booth's peculiar blend of narcissistic personality traits and histrionic tendencies. He displayed a pattern of grandiose thinking, need for admiration, and lack of empathy characteristic of narcissistic personality disorder. Yet unlike many narcissists, Booth was willing to risk and ultimately sacrifice his own life and reputation for his cause. The assassination plot itself reveals much about Booth's mental state. Initially planning to kidnap Lincoln, his schemes grew increasingly grandiose and violent. The final plan to simultaneously murder the President, Vice President, and Secretary of State speaks to a man who saw himself as the director of a grand historical drama. Consider the theatrical elements of the assassination itself. Booth chose Ford's Theatre, a venue where he had often performed, and waited for the precise moment of the biggest laugh line to fire his fatal shot. Even his escape was choreographed like a theatrical production, complete with a dramatic leap to the stage that broke his leg. Was this the behavior of a rational political assassin or someone lost in their own theatrical fantasy? The psychological significance of Booth's post-assassination behavior is particularly revealing. He seemed genuinely shocked that the public viewed him as a murderer rather than a heroic tyrannicide. In his diary, discovered later, he wrote, "For 6 months we had worked to capture, but our cause being almost lost, something decisive and great must be done." But what drove this fatal disconnect from reality? Some experts point to the psychological pressure of living up to the Booth family name. Others suggest that his growing political fanaticism provided an outlet for deeper psychological instabilities. As we'll discover, the truth likely involves a complex interaction between personal psychology, political ideology, and the unique pressures of life in the public eye. The manhunt that followed the assassination offers further insights into Booth's psychological state. Despite his broken leg and the massive forces arrayed against him, he remained convinced that the people of the South would hail him as a hero. This persistent delusion, maintained in the face of overwhelming contrary evidence, suggests a mind that had lost the ability to process reality accurately. Consider his final hours at Garrett's farm, surrounded by Union cavalry. Even then, Booth maintained his theatrical persona, declaring, "Tell my mother, I die for my country." Was this the statement of a true believer, or the last performance of an actor who could no longer distinguish between his roles and reality? Modern psychiatric analysis suggests that Booth likely suffered from what we would now recognize as a combination of personality disorders complicated by possible delusional disorder. His grandiose sense of self, need for dramatic attention, and increasingly paranoid worldview created a perfect storm of psychological factors that culminated in assassination. What makes Booth's case particularly relevant to modern studies of political violence is his status as what psychiatrists call a rational fanatic, someone whose delusions are circumscribed enough to allow for detailed planning and execution of violent acts, while still being severe enough to override normal moral constraints. As you consider Booth's psychological profile, ask yourself, how different was he from modern political extremists who commit acts of violence? The parallels are often disturbing. The same combination of grandiose thinking, ideological fervor, and theatrical flair can be seen in many contemporary cases of political violence. The aftermath of Booth's action provides final insights into his psychology. His last words, "useless, useless," spoken as he looked at his hands before dying, suggest a moment of clarity, or perhaps just one final dramatic gesture. But what did these words really mean? Was this the voice of a man finally confronting reality, or one last line delivered by an actor who never stopped performing? Today, Booth's psychology continues to fascinate experts studying the minds of political assassins. His case demonstrates how personal psychology, political ideology, and cultural context can combine to create a lethal catalyst for violence. In an era where political violence remains a pressing concern, understanding the psychological forces that drove Booth may help us recognize and prevent similar acts in the future. His story serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of losing the ability to distinguish between political theater and reality, between playing a role and living one. In the end, John Wilkes Booth's greatest tragedy may have been his inability to recognize that he had stopped acting and started living out a dark fantasy that would forever change the course of American history. Was Booth insane? Or was he simply an overzealous political instigator who allowed his emotions to lead him toward a disastrous fate? Let us know what you think in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more videos like these.